There is a morning ritual with the power to transform even the most disordered mind in the world into one that is utterly unshakable. It was forged from the teachings of a man who never touched a productivity app, never opened a self-help book, and never enrolled in a single course on organization or routine management. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to wake each day with a mind that is perfectly clear, without that haze of thoughts, without that nagging sense that you're already indebted to the world before your feet hit the floor, without needing coffee, motivation, or a scroll through your phone just to feel human? To most people, this sounds impossible. And that is precisely why most people never arrive where they truly want to be. There once lived a Japanese warrior in the 17th century who fought in over 60 duels, never lost a single one, and spent his final years alone in a cave in silence, writing down the principles that governed his mind. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and he left behind no specific morning routine, no schedules, no stages, no checklists. What he did leave behind was a philosophy of how the mind ought to exist upon waking. It is not merely about how to find focus, but about how to never lose that focus from the very first moment of the morning. And once you grasp this principle, everything shifts. The way you begin your day, the way you respond to hardship, the way you construct what you wish to construct. In this video, I'm going to reveal the morning ritual that will help you forge an unbeatable mind. Before we go further, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, do that now. Turn on notifications as well, and drop a comment below. What is the biggest challenge you face first thing in the morning? This helps me tremendously and shows me that you are truly serious about change. Stephen was 23 years old and living in Texas. He would wake up each morning with the sensation that the day had already started without him. He didn't stay up late. He woke up relatively early. But waking up and starting the day are two entirely different things, and Stephen had not yet learned that lesson. The alarm rang at 7:00 a.m. He hit snooze. A second alarm at 7:15 a.m. This time he reached for his phone and opened Instagram, X, and his email notifications. Unanswered messages from the night before. Before he had even made his first conscious decision of the day, he was already responding to the decisions of everyone else. He made coffee while glancing at his phone. He showered with his mind racing, replaying what he should have done yesterday. He left the house already in reactive mode, already emotionally in debt. At work, where he was a freelance video maker, the same pattern repeated. He opened 6 tabs at once. He'd edit half a video, stop to answer a message, and then return to the video with no idea where he had left off. The day wasn't lived, it was survived. And at the center of it all was a dream he couldn't let go of. Stephen wanted to build his own company, an artificial intelligence startup. He saw the market expanding, read about the opportunities, knew he had good ideas, but the project remained trapped in a notes app on his phone, filled with drafts that never went anywhere. Stephen's problem was a lack of structure. He lacked a fixed starting point. Each day began from scratch, as if the previous day had never existed. And as time passed, the frustration only grew. Perhaps you recognize yourself in Stephen's story. Perhaps even before the day begins, you already wake up tired, thinking about 100 things at once, anxious that another day has started and everything will repeat itself. And you start the day numbing yourself with your phone, with social media. Stephen suffered through this every morning, until one day, everything changed in the worst possible way. Stephen had landed a job as a videographer at a company that truly caught his attention, an online education platform focused on high performance and emotional balance, founded by a man named Arata. Arata was a Japanese American, around 50 years old, who ran an online community teaching neuroscience and Japanese philosophies applied to real life. The kind of business Steven found fascinating, even if he didn't fully understand what was being taught there. He needed that job. His parents needed help at home, and he got the position. In the first few days, everything seemed fine. The atmosphere was unlike anywhere he had ever worked. People arrived on time. Meetings ended on schedule. There was a functional calm in the place that Steven had never witnessed before. But the problem was that Steven's bad habits came to work with him. The same chaotic mornings, the same phone in hand before getting out of bed, the same feeling that the day was starting before he was ready for it. And at work, the same distractions, multiple projects open at once, deadlines treated as suggestions. Then came the most important launch of the quarter. Arata had planned the release of a new community module. All the marketing depended on a series of videos that Steven was responsible for delivering. Clear deadlines, detailed briefings, everything was laid out, and Steven was late. Not out of laziness, but out of chaos, out of distraction, out of that disordered routine he had never managed to fix. The videos arrived 2 days late. The launch had to be rescheduled. The company lost a strategic market window. When Arata called Steven in for a meeting, Steven entered the room convinced he was about to be fired. He mentally prepared his words of apology and readied himself to hand over his equipment. But what happened in that room changed his life forever. Arata did not comment on the delay. He looked at Steven in silence for a few seconds and asked a simple question. "What are your mornings like?" Steven didn't understand. He had expected a reprimand, a performance review, maybe a list of failings. Not this question. But he answered. He spoke about the alarms, the phone, the distraction, the feeling of always chasing something he never reached. He spoke about the business project that never went anywhere, about the frustration of knowing what he wanted and not even being able to start. Arata listened to everything without interrupting. When Steven finished, Arata said something Steven would never forget. "The problem isn't your ability. It's the state in which you surrender the day to the world before belonging to yourself." Steven didn't understand immediately. Arata continued, "There's a concept in Japan called Haijoshin, the everyday mind. Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest samurai who ever lived, built his invincibility on this principle. Not on elaborate routines or complex rituals, but on the refusal to begin the day in two different states." He stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside for a moment. Musashi never left a manual with schedules and steps for a perfect morning, but everything he wrote in the Book of Five Rings and the Dakota points in the same direction. An unbeatable mind isn't built overnight. It is preserved in the morning, because the unbeatable mind never ceases to exist. After that day, Arata made Steven a proposal. Every Saturday afternoon, they would meet for a private conversation. Arata would teach him what had taken him decades to learn. Steven would apply it during the week and return with real questions. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't motivational coaching. It was a direct transmission of a way of life. And in their first Saturday conversation, Arata began with the principle that underpinned everything. "I'm going to ask you a question," Arata said that first Saturday afternoon. "Have you ever noticed that on days when you have an important meeting, a deadline, or something that really matters, you wake up feeling different?" Steven thought. "Yes. And on ordinary days, you wake up in a fog slowly, too lazy to even begin." "That's true. That's exactly the problem," Arata said. "You have two states, the combat state and the rest state, and you spend the morning trying to migrate from one to the other. This migration costs energy, time, and clarity." He opened a notebook and showed a sentence. "In both combat and daily life, you must be determined, yet calm. Your mind must be clear-headed, but without prejudice." Musashi, the Book of Water. He's not talking about a combat technique. He's talking about a permanent state of being. For Musashi, there was no transition between the moment of rest and the moment of action. There was only one state present, calm, ready. Stephen frowned. But how do you maintain that when you wake up? The first thing the mind wants is to comfort itself. That's exactly why what you do in the first 60 seconds of the day determines everything that comes after. Arata replied, "Your mistake is that you hand over those 60 seconds to an app's algorithm, and the whole day will follow that pattern. If you keep them to yourself, the whole day will follow a different pattern." This is backed by neuroscience. Researchers studying the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for focus, judgment, and impulse control, have discovered that in the first few hours after waking, the brain is in a state of very high plasticity. The first stimuli of the day shape the neurological pattern of the following hours. When you wake up and immediately grab your phone, you hand over this plastic state to reactive mode. The prefrontal cortex begins the day in a defensive position, not a leadership position. Musashi's morning ritual, Arata said, was not a to-do list. It was a refusal. A refusal to wake up in two states. Stephen returned home that Saturday with a simple task for the next 7 days upon waking. He was not to touch his phone for 30 minutes. On the second day, his hand automatically went to his phone before he even realized he was awake. The movement was so automatic that it was startling. It was no longer just an addiction. It had become a neural pattern. The brain had created a sequence. Wake up, check phone, consume content. That happened below the level of consciousness. It was on the third day, by then more alert, that Stephen noticed something he had never noticed before. There was a period of 2 to 3 minutes right after waking up when his mind was absolutely quiet. No thoughts about the past or the future, just pure presence. And in all previous years, he had ruined that moment with notifications. The following Saturday, he told Arata about it. Arata smiled. "You just discovered Zanshin." Zanshin, a central concept in Japanese martial philosophy, literally translated as mind that remains, awareness that doesn't switch off, a state of total attention without tension. For the samurai, Zanshin wasn't just applied in combat. It was applied to every moment of existence. Musashi practiced painting, calligraphy, and sculpture with the same precision with which he practiced swordsmanship, because he understood that Zanshin was a muscle, and muscles that are not used atrophy. In the first 60 seconds after you wake up, Arata said, your mind is naturally in Zanshin because sleep just did that for you. The question isn't how to get into that state, it's how not to destroy it immediately. Roy Baumeister, a psychologist who spent decades studying decision burnout, demonstrated that the capacity to make quality decisions is a finite resource. Each micro decision consumes a portion of that resource. When you wake up without structure, you start the day making decisions that shouldn't exist. What to answer first? Where to begin? What to prioritize? You waste the mental clarity of the early morning, the most valuable resource of the day, deciding on things that could have already been decided. Musashi never wasted energy deciding what to train. The way had already decided for him. This is the second pillar of the ritual that Arata called the Musashi method. In their third Saturday conversation, Arata asked a question that left Stephen speechless. Where do you want to go? I want to build an AI company. No, that's not what I asked. I asked where you want to go. What's your Michi, the way? For Musashi, Michi was not a destination. It was a direction of existence. A direction so clear that each morning upon waking, there was no doubt about what the next few hours should serve. In the Book of Five Rings, Musashi repeats a phrase with almost obsessive insistence. You must practice this day and night, not when I feel like it. not when circumstances allow, day and night, because for him, the way was not an external commitment. It was an internal identity. He didn't practice swordsmanship because he wanted to become a samurai. He practiced because he was a samurai. The practice was the daily affirmation of who he was. Stephen's problem, said Arata, was that he had dreams, but he didn't have a path. Dreams are destiny. The path is the daily direction. The difference seems small, but it is huge. Those who have a dream wake up every day, trying to figure out how to get there. Those who have a path wake up every day, doing the next obvious thing. The task for the following week was simply Stephen had to identify a single thing, a practice, a skill, or a project, which, if done every morning for 30 minutes before anything else, would move him in the direction of what he wanted to build. He chose to study AI systems architecture. 30 minutes every morning before email, before notifications, before any external demands. The first week was strange. Sitting down to study at 6:00 a.m., with his mind still foggy, felt like a mistake. But something started to change by the third morning. He went to work feeling different. No longer rushed, no longer in debt. He had done something for himself before doing anything for the world. And that changed the texture of the rest of his day. On Saturday, during their fourth conversation, Arata arrived with an old notebook in his hand. Are you familiar with the Dakodo? Stephen had heard the name, but he didn't know what it was. In his final days, Musashi retreated to a cave called Raigando. Alone, without students, without a sword, without comfort. There he wrote 2 texts. The Book of 5 Rings, his strategic philosophy, and the Dakodo, his philosophy of existence. Arata opened the notebook to a marked page. The first precept of Dakodo, the principle that opens everything. Accept everything exactly as it is. Stephen remained silent. Most people start the day resisting. They resist tiredness. They resist the weather. They resist bad news. They resist the work they have to do. And this resistance, before anything even happens, consumes an enormous amount of emotional energy. Musashi called the opposite state Fudoshin, the motionless mind. Not the mind that is never struck, but the mind that is never overthrown. Fudoshin is not indifference. It is the active acceptance of reality as it is, and from that acceptance, the deliberate choice of how to respond. For Stephen, this meant one practical thing: stop starting the day negotiating with reality. That's okay. Tough day ahead. That's okay. Plans changed. That's okay. Reality is what it is. The question is what you do from there. Many people waste time arguing with reality, as if that would solve anything. Some people, after a bad night's sleep, wake up complaining that they didn't sleep well, that they're tired, that they can't concentrate, that they wish they had done things differently. But complaining doesn't change anything. What changes things is action. So instead of complaining, think about action. What can you do to solve the problem? Face the day with courage. Neuroscientist Jill Bolt Taylor documented something fascinating about emotions. The physiological cycle of an emotion in the human body lasts approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds for the chemical substance to be released, circulate through the body, and be absorbed. Anything that lasts longer than 90 seconds is not the emotion. It is thinking about the emotion. When you wake up resisting, it's not the circumstances that drain your energy. It's the story you tell yourself about the circumstances. Musashi understood this viscerally. Before entering any duel, he didn't waste emotional energy wishing his opponent were weaker, that the terrain were more favorable, or that the conditions were better. He accepted what was and designed his strategy based on reality, not on the reality he wished existed. Start the day by accepting, Arata said, not as resignation, but as a foundation. You can't build anything solid on resistance. Weeks passed. Stephen was changing silently and steadily, like water shaping stone. But on a Friday, everything went wrong. A meeting that went badly, a difficult client, a bad night's sleep. He woke up late, skipped his morning study, and spent 40 minutes on his phone before getting up. On Saturday, he arrived at the conversation with Arata visibly frustrated with himself. Arata listened and said something unexpected. Musashi never called what he did discipline. Stephen looked at him uncomprehendingly. Discipline is a word that implies effort against resistance. It implies that there is a part of you that wants to rest and another that forces you to work. Musashi did not operate that way. He went to the bookshelf, picked up a book, and opened it to a page. The fourth pillar isn't about what you do in the morning. It's about what you refuse to let happen during the night. The phrase hung in the air. Musashi said practice day and night, not because practice never stops, but because the mind never stops. You don't go to a battlefield and then say, "Now I'm going to rest my warrior skills for a few hours." Skill either exists or it doesn't. The mental state either is or it isn't. What Musashi practiced was not the refusal of rest. It was the refusal to let the mind become lax, to allow the state of clarity to dissolve into habits of low consciousness, endless scrolling, passive consumption, directionless emotional reactivity. Rest was sacred. Dissolution was the enemy. The night before the day you failed, Arata asked, "What did you do?" Stephen thought, "I stayed on my phone until midnight. Social media, nothing important." "And when you went to sleep, was your mind calm or racing?" "Accelerated." So the problem wasn't what you did in the morning. The problem was what you allowed to happen the night before. You went to sleep with a chaotic mind and woke up with the same mind. Musashi's morning ritual did not begin in the morning. It started the night before. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist who has spent decades studying what happens to the brain during sleep, has identified something central. Sleep quality is directly determined by mental state in the 60 to 90 minutes before falling asleep. A prefrontal cortex under constant stimulation, notifications, accelerated content, unimportant decisions, cannot completely switch off during sleep. The result is not just tiredness. It's a morning when the brain is already in reactive mode, as if it had never truly rested. Musashi didn't have laboratories. He had observation, decades of self-observation, and the conclusion was the same. In their 8th Saturday conversation, Arata made a statement that Stephen would remember forever. "I need to be honest with you about something." Miyamoto Musashi left no record of a morning routine. There is no diary with times, sequences of steps, or checklists. No biography from that time documents what he did upon waking. Stephen looked at him in surprise. "So everything we've talked about, it's a well-founded inference," Arata said, "based on the principles he explicitly documented in the Book of Five Rings and in the Dokudo. It is possible to reconstruct what the ritual of a man who lived by these principles completely would have been like. It's not fantasy. It's a deduction, like an archaeologist who reconstructs a city from the fragments he finds." Well, he continued, "And what these principles indicate without exception is that Musashi didn't need a morning ritual, because he never left the state that a morning ritual should create. This was Haijoshin in its most radical form. He did not live in two mental states, the state of rest and the state of the warrior. He lived solely in one, continuous and permanent. What we've created together in the last few weeks," Arata said, "is what Musashi would teach if he were to teach about his own ritual. The 4 pillars that support the unbeatable mind, not because I invented them, but because each one of them is written in different ways on every page he left behind. Waking up without transition, without 2 states, already present from the very first second. The first 60 seconds in silence, preserving the state of full consciousness, that sleep provides before any external stimulus destroys it. The first hour of the day dedicated to the path, to what truly matters, before any external demands. Fudoshin and Dakodo start the day by accepting reality as it is, without resistance, without negotiation, building from what exists and not from what one would wish to exist. It's not a routine, it's a state of being. 3 months after that first conversation in Arata's office, Stephen was a different man, not visibly so to those who didn't know him well. On the outside, he was the same 23-year-old, same job, same city. But inside, the texture of each day had changed completely. He would wake up without an alarm most mornings. His body had learned the schedule. He would spend the first few minutes in silence, without his phone, letting the clarity of sleep settle in before anything else. Then he would open his computer and study for 30 or 40 minutes. AI systems architecture, the project he wanted to build. No notifications, no email, no world demanding anything. Only then did the day begin. And it began differently. The startup project had moved from a notepad to a structured document, then a plan, then an MVP. A minimum viable product designed with the same clarity that he was learning to apply to everything. One Saturday, at the end of his conversation with Arata, Stephen hesitated for a moment. Then he said, "I want to show you something." He opened his computer. He presented the project to Arata, an AI-powered automation system for small businesses. 15 minutes, clear, structured with real market data. When he finished, Arata remained silent for a moment. "There's a pricing error," he finally said. Stephen looked at the numbers. Arata was right. "Correct this and send it to me again, because I have 2 clients who might need this." Arata already knew about the project before that presentation. He had seen Stephen working on it during the week. He had silently watched the transformation. He had waited, not as a test, but as a teacher who knows that the student needs to arrive at it on their own. The presentation was not the moment when Stephen convinced Arata. It was the moment when Stephen became convinced of himself. And there is a fundamental difference between the two, because an unbeatable mind doesn't need approval to exist. It exists first. Approval comes later, or it doesn't come. It doesn't matter. Musashi fought more than 60 duels. He never waited for his opponent's validation before drawing his sword. The unbeatable mind was already formed before the fight even began. Stephen arrived at the beginning of this story at 20, 3 years old with big dreams and a routine that destroyed those dreams before the day even began. Not for lack of intelligence, not for lack of will, but for lack of a foundational state. Through the teachings of Arata, based on the principles that Musashi lived by and documented for centuries, he learned 4 things that changed everything. He learned that waking up isn't the same as starting, that the first 60 seconds of the day define the neurological pattern for the following hours, and that surrendering those 60 seconds to a notification is surrendering the entire day. He learned that Zanshin, full awareness, doesn't need to be built in the morning. It exists naturally upon waking. The task is simply not to destroy it immediately. He learned that without a Mishi, without a clear path, every morning starts from scratch. And those 30 minutes dedicated to what matters before any external demands can change the trajectory of an entire year. And he learned that Fudoshin is not resignation. It is the foundation of everything. Accepting reality exactly as it is not weakness. It is the only honest starting point from which any real construction can begin. Musashi never wrote a morning itinerary with schedules and stages. What he wrote on every page of the Book of 5 Rings and in every precept of the Dakodo was a map of how a mind should exist. Not just in the morning, but all the time. An invincible mind isn't built in the morning. It's preserved in the morning because it never ceases to exist. The question that remains is not, What is my morning routine? The question is, in what state do I surrender my mind to the world? And in what state do I refuse to hand it over? You have the principles in your hands now. What are you going to do with them? If this video made you see your morning in a different way, subscribe to the channel and activate the little bell. Every week there's new content that can change the way you think, act, and build what you want. And tell me in the comments which of the 4 pillars is the biggest challenge for you today. Haijoshin, Zanshin, Michi, or Fudoshin. I want to know. I invite you now to watch this video that is appearing on your screen. Your journey continues here. Thank you very much for your support. Until the next video.